In the previous lecture, you learned how to create a new Temboo Choreo and set up the appropriate credentials and permissions so that it can access a Google Spreadsheet. In this lecture, I'll show you how to complete the setup. I'll show you how to generate the code for your Arduino that takes into account your type of Arduino board and your available networking hardware. I will also show you how to use Temboo profiles to reduce any security risks and improve the flexibility of your Choreos. We will then take the code that Temboo generated based on your choices and upload it and run it on an Arduino. Let's check it out. In the last lecture, we set up a new Choreo on Temboo so that we can get data from the Arduino and store them in a Google Spreadsheet. We tested that Choreo and it works without the Arduino, and in this lecture, I would like to get the Arduino as part of this setup. This is what we have at the moment. We've got our credentials for Google Sheets set up. This is a bit that we tested. We tried some dummy data and that works. And now we'd like to integrate the Arduino. So I've got my IoT mode on and I've selected the Arduino. I'm just going to be using a Arduino Uno for this, but any Arduino with the ability to connect to the internet will work. And in my case, I'm going to be using just a classic Arduino Ethernet shield with my Arduino Uno. So I'll fill in the blanks here. I'm just going to call my Arduino shield Arduino Ethernet shield. It's a simple Ethernet shield, and for the MAC address, I'm just going to copy it from one of my other sketches. It's all hexadecimal, so I'm going to remove all the zeros and the commas. And that should do it. So now I've got my Arduino and my Arduino Ethernet shield set up. And before we have a look at what Temboo has done in the meantime, is that Temboo has generated some code now. So it's generated the sketch that the Arduino will execute in order to become part of this setup. And there's a second file here, the header file that contains my credentials for my account, my Temboo account. Let's have a quick look at the Temboo code before we copy it to the Arduino. First, it includes a bunch of libraries. I've got SPI, DHCP, DNS, etc. There is the Temboo library as well, which for the newer Arduino IDE releases, essentially 1.60 and later, it is already included with the IDE, so you shouldn't have to download and install the Temboo library. Next, we set up the Ethernet. We initialize the Ethernet, connect to the internet. The interesting part is here, actually in between those two brackets, where we interact with Temboo. So this is the actual dedicated Temboo code. You can see that we can select a spreadsheet. Here's the name of the spreadsheet that we'll be accessing. And there's a append row Choreo object with an add input function. We pass the information as to which spreadsheet we'd like to access like this. We create a string that contains our comma delimited values, and then we can pass these values to the spreadsheet by calling the add input function. So row data, so there's where the string goes. So anything that is comma delimited, then you can insert here. Later on, we'll be substituting these values with values that come from the DHT22 sensor. There's other information here like the refresh token value and the client secret value and so on. So One problem is that, of course, this code takes a little bit of space, but it's also private information that perhaps you don't want to distribute out with your Arduino. Also, another problem with hardwiring this information to your sketch is that if your credentials change in your Google API setup, you'll have to go and make the changes to your Arduino sketch, recompile it, and then deploy it again to the Arduino. And if the Arduino is, say, in a remote location, then that might be problematic. An alternative to having all this information hardwired in your sketch is to create a profile. So I already have a bunch of profiles set up earlier, but I'm going to convert this setup into a profile. So just click on the Save button and give it a name. So texplore Temboo example 1. You can't have any white spaces or underscores, so it's just one word. And save that. And now I'm going to have this profile to use with this Temboo Choreo. And let's have a look again at the code. You see now that the code doesn't contain any credentials anymore, but it just requests from Temboo to use the profile with this name. Now this profile contains all of the credentials that Temboo needs to access my Google account and my spreadsheets account. So the information is hidden from your Arduino. If these credentials change, then the only place to make the change will be in your Temboo Choreo in this form instead of in the Arduino sketch. The header file hasn't changed. The header file remains the same. This Temboo key is a Temboo key that corresponds to my account, and that has to stay on the Arduino. It's part of the credentials that the Arduino sends to my Temboo account so that it can access it. So with all that done, I can download the code now. And extract it. And here is the code that Temboo created for me. Let's start it. All right, so both files are here. There's the header file and the main sketch. This sketch, all it does now is to go to Temboo and get Temboo to create a new record with whatever dummy values I've set up in my profile, these two values here. I'd like to execute this sketch first on the Arduino to make sure that it really works, and then I'll show you how to customize it. So that's my Arduino connected via USB to my computer. I will upload, just double check that the credentials are, the settings are correct. Yep, they're good, and upload the sketch. Okay, the sketch is uploaded. Let's have a look at the serial monitor. So everything okay with the DHCP server and running append row run number 1. Let's check out. We should have a new record here. There's a new record. So got a new access token. Let's wait for run number 2. Run number 2 should get a new record in row number 5. Yes, so there's a new record in row number 5. So that's looking good. Our sketch is working. How about we make a change to the sketch so that instead of the dummy data that I configured earlier in the Choreo setup, I send actual values from the sketch itself. I will not use the DHT sensor yet. I just want to set up my sketch so that it can send custom values. So I'm going to add a little bit of code to my sketch. If you remember from earlier when we were looking at the non-profile based version of the sketch, there is an instruction called add input. So I'm going to copy a bit of code that I prepared earlier and then describe it. I'm going to copy that code after the set profile instruction. So down here, what I do is I create a new string, and then I take a reading from analog pin 0. It's just going to return a random number, convert it into a string. So this is a type, turn the integer into a string, and then store it in the sensor value variable. And then I append a comma, and then I append another value from, in this time, analog pin 1, another random value. Then I'll use the add input instruction to copy the sensor value, comma delimited values, to a new row in the Google spreadsheet. You may remember that this add input instruction was listed in the original version of the sketch before we created a profile for it. Okay, that's about it. Let's upload that new sketch, the adjusted sketch, to my Arduino, and then have a look at the new values that will be uploaded to the spreadsheet. Okay, with DHCP, run number 1. And there you go, random values from the Arduino, analog pin 0 and analog pin 1. Great. So the next thing to do now is to actually get real readings from the DHT sensor and get those readings stored in my spreadsheet. All right, so go to the top of my sketch, and I'll copy some code for that sensor. So there's a library, and my sensor is connected to pin number 2. The sensor type is a DHT22. Create the DHT22 object. In the setup function, let's start the sensor. All right, so now I'll replace the reading from analog pin 0 with the reading for temperature. And same thing for the humidity. So replace this with humidity. Okay, let's upload the sketch. DHCP OK. Run number 1. And here's the temperature and humidity value. So the sensor is reading 28.8 degrees Celsius and 51.3% humidity. So there you go. This is an example of how you can set up a Temboo Choreo that works with your Arduino and grabs data from a sensor connected to the Arduino and stores the data on a Google spreadsheet. In the next lecture, we'll do something similar, but instead of getting the data from the sensor stored in a Google Spreadsheet, we'll get Temboo to send us an email.